That was the way Dean found me when he finally decided I was worth saving. He took me home to Camille's house. "Where's Mary Lou, man?" The whore ran off. Camille was a relief after Mary Lou, a well-bred, polite young woman, and she was aware of the fact that the $18 Dean had sent her was mine. But oh, where went thou, sweet Mary Lou? I relaxed a few days in Camille's house. From her living room window in the wooden tenement on Liberty Street, you could see all of San Francisco burning green and red in the rainy night. Dean did the most ridiculous thing of his career the few days I was there. He got a job demonstrating a new kind of pressure cooker in the kitchens of homes. The salesman gave him piles of samples and pamphlets. First day, Dean was a hurricane of energy. I drove all over town with him as he made appointments. The idea was to get invited socially to a dinner party and then leap up and start demonstrating the pressure cooker. "Man," cried Dean excitedly, "this is even crazier than the time I worked for Sina. Sina sold encyclopedias in Oakland. Nobody could turn him down. He made long speeches. He jumped up and down. He laughed. He cried. One time we broke into an Okie house where everybody was getting ready to go to a funeral. Sina got down on his knees and prayed for the deliverance of the deceased soul. All the Okies started crying. He sold a complete set of encyclopedias. He was the maddest guy in the world. I wonder where he is. We used to get next to pretty young daughters and feel them up in the kitchen. This afternoon, I had the gauntest housewife in her little kitchen, arm around her, demonstrating, wow. "Keep it up, Dean," I said. "Maybe someday you'll be the mayor of San Francisco." He had the whole cookpot spiel worked out. He practiced on Camille and me in the evenings. One morning he stood naked, looking at all San Francisco out the window as the sun came up. He looked like someday he'd be the pagan mayor of San Francisco. But his energies ran out. One rainy afternoon, the salesman came around to find out what Dean was doing. Dean was sprawled on the couch. "Have you been trying to sell these?" "No," said Dean. "I have another job coming up." "Well, what are you going to do about all these samples?" "I don't know." In a dead silence, the salesman gathered up his sad pots and left. I was sick and tired of everything, and so was Dean. But one night we suddenly went mad together again. We went to see Slim Gaylord in a little San Francisco nightclub. Slim Gaylord is a tall, thin Negro with big, sad eyes who's always saying, "Right a Rooney," and "How about a little Bourbon a Rooney?" In Frisco, great eager crowds of young semi-intellectuals sat at his feet and listened to him on the piano, guitar, and bongo drums. When he gets warmed up, he takes off his shirt and undershirt and really goes. He does and says anything that comes into his head. He'll sing "Cement Mixer," a pooty pooty, and suddenly slow down the beat and brood over his bongos with fingertips barely tapping the skin as everybody leans forward breathlessly to hear. You think he'll do this for a minute or so, but he goes right on for as long as an hour, making an imperceptible little noise with the tips of his fingernails, smaller and smaller all the time till you can't hear it anymore and sounds of traffic come in the open door. Then he slowly gets up, takes the mic, and says very slowly, "Great Rooney, Fino Vate, hello Rooney, Bourbon Rooney, Lua Rooney." "How are the boys in the front row making out with their girls Rooney, Rooney Vote, Rooney, Rooney?" He keeps this up for 15 minutes, his voice getting softer and softer till you can't hear. His great sad eyes scan the audience. Dean stands in the back saying, "God, yes," and clasping his hands in prayer and sweating. "Sal, Slim knows time. He knows time." Slim sits down at the piano and hits 2 notes, 2 C's, then 2 more, then 1, then 2, and suddenly the big burly bass player wakes up from a reverie and realizes Slim is playing C-Jam blues, and he slugs in his big forefinger on the string, and the big booming beat begins, and everybody starts rocking, and Slim looks just as sad as ever, and they blow jazz for half an hour. And then Slim goes mad and grabs the bongos and plays tremendous rapid Cubana beats and yells crazy things in Spanish and Arabic and Peruvian dialect and Egyptian and every language he knows, and he knows innumerable languages. Finally, the set is over. Each set takes 2 hours. Slim Gaylord goes and stands against a post, looking sadly over everybody's head as people come to talk to him. A bourbon is slipped into his hand. "Bourbona Rooney, thank you, Vute." Nobody knows where Slim Gaylord is. Dean once had a dream that he was having a baby, and his belly was all bloated up blue as he lay on the grass of a California hospital. Under a tree with a group of colored men sat Slim Gaylord. Dean turned despairing eyes of a mother to him. Slim said, "There you go, Rooney." Now Dean approached him. He approached his God. He thought Slim was God. He shuffled and bowed in front of him and asked him to join us. "Right, Rooney," says Slim. "He'll join anybody, but he won't guarantee to be there with you in spirit." Dean got a table, bought drinks, and sat stiffly in front of Slim. Slim dreamed over his head. Every time Slim said, "Rooney," Dean said, "Yes." I sat there with these two madmen. Nothing happened. To Slim Gaylord, the whole world was just one big Rooney. That same night, I dug Lampshade on Fillmore and Geary. Lampshade is a big colored guy who comes into musical Frisco saloons with coat, hat, and scarf and jumps on the bandstand and starts singing. The veins pop in his forehead. He heaves back and blows a big foghorn blues out of every muscle in his soul. He yells at people while he's singing. "Don't die to go to heaven. Start in on Dr. Pepper and end up on whiskey." His voice booms over everything. He grimaces, he writhes, he does everything. He came over to our table and leaned over to us and said, "Yes." And then he staggered out to the street to hit another saloon. Then there's Connie Jordan, a madman who sings and flips his arms and ends up splashing sweat on everybody and kicking over the mic and screaming like a woman. And you see him late at night, exhausted, listening to wild jazz sessions at Jamson's Nook, with big round eyes and limp shoulders, a big gooky stare into space, and a drink in front of him. I never saw such crazy musicians. Everybody in Frisco blew. It was the end of the continent. They didn't give a damn. Dean and I goofed around San Francisco in this manner until I got my next GI check and got ready to go back home. What I accomplished by coming to Frisco, I don't know. Camille wanted me to leave. Dean didn't care one way or the other. I bought a loaf of bread and meats and made myself 10 sandwiches to cross the country with again. They were all going to go rotten on me by the time I got to Dakota. The last night, Dean went mad and found Mary Lou somewhere downtown, and we got in the car and drove all over Richmond across the bay, hitting Negro jazz shacks and the oil flats. Mary Lou went to sit down, and a colored guy pulled the chair out from under her. The gals approached her in the John with propositions. I was approached, too. Dean was sweating around. It was the end. I wanted to get out. At dawn, I got my New York bus and said goodbye to Dean and Mary Lou. They wanted some of my sandwiches. I told them no. It was a sullen moment. We were all thinking we'd never see one another again, and we didn't care. In the spring of 1949, I had a few dollars saved from my GI education checks, and I went to Denver, thinking of settling down there. I saw myself in Middle America, a patriarch. I was lonesome. Nobody was there. No Babe Rollins, Ray Rollins, Tim Gray, Betty Gray, Roland Major, Dean Moriarty, Carlo Marx, Ed Dunkel, Roy Johnson, Tommy Snark. Nobody. I wandered around Curtis Street and Larimer Street, worked a while in the wholesale fruit market where I almost got hired in 1947. The hardest job of my life. At one point, the Japanese kids and I had to move a whole boxcar 100 feet down the rail by hand with a jack gadget that made it move 1/4 of an inch with each yank. I lugged watermelon crates over the ice floor of reefers into the blazing sun, sneezing. In God's name and under the stars, what for? At dusk, I walked. I felt like a speck on the surface of the sad red earth. I passed the Windsor Hotel, where Dean Moriarty had lived with his father in the Depression 30s, and as of yore, I looked everywhere for the sad and fabled tinsmith of my mind. Either you find someone who looks like your father in places like Montana, or you look for a friend's father where he is no more. At lilac evening, I walked with every muscle aching among the lights of 27th and Welton in the Denver colored section, wishing I were a Negro, feeling that the best the white world had offered was not enough ecstasy for me, not enough life, joy, kicks, darkness, music, not enough night. I stopped at a little shack where a man sold hot red chili in paper containers. I bought some and ate it, strolling in the dark, mysterious streets. I wished I were a Denver Mexican, or even a poor, overworked Jap, anything but what I was so drearily, a white man disillusioned. All my life I had white ambitions. That was why I abandoned a good woman like Terry in the San Joaquin Valley. I passed the dark porches of Mexican and Negro homes. Soft voices were there, occasionally the dusky knee of some mysterious sensual gal, and dark faces of the men behind rose arbors. Little children sat like sages in ancient rocking chairs. A gang of colored women came by, and and one of the young ones detached herself from the mother-like elders and came to me fast. "Hello, Joe." And suddenly saw it wasn't Joe and ran back blushing. I wished I were Joe. I was only myself, Sal Paradise, sad, strolling in this violet dark, this unbearably sweet night, wishing I could exchange worlds with the happy, true-hearted, ecstatic Negroes of America. The raggedy neighborhoods reminded me of Dean and Mary Lou, who knew these streets so well from childhood. How I wished I could find them. Down at 23rd and Welton, a softball game was going on under floodlights which also illuminated the gas tank. A great eager crowd roared at every play. The strange young heroes of all kinds, white, colored, Mexican, pure Indian, were on the field performing with heartbreaking seriousness. Just Sandlot kids in uniform. Never in my life as an athlete had I ever permitted myself to perform like this in front of families and girlfriends and kids of the neighborhood, at night, under lights. Always it had been college, big-time, sober-faced. No boyish human joy like this. Now it was too late. Near me sat an old Negro who apparently watched the games every night. Next to him was an old white bum, then a Mexican family, then some girls, some boys, all humanity, the lot. Oh, the sadness of the lights that night. The young pitcher looked just like Dean. A pretty blonde in the seats looked just like Mary Lou. It was the Denver night. All I did was die. Down in Denver. All I did was die. Across the street, Negro families sat on their front steps, talking and looking up at the starry night through the trees and just relaxing in the softness and sometimes watching the game. Many cars passed in the street meanwhile and stopped at the corner when the light turned red. There was excitement, and the air was filled with the vibration of really joyous life that knows nothing of disappointment and white sorrows and all that. The old Negro man had a can of beer in his coat pocket, which he proceeded to open, and the old white man enviously eyed the can and groped in his pocket to see if he could buy a can too. How I died. I walked away from there. I went to see a rich girl I knew. In the morning she pulled a $100 bill out of her silk stocking and said, "You've been talking of a trip to Frisco. That being the case, take this and go have your fun." So all my problems were solved, and I got a travel bureau car for $11 gas fare to Frisco and zoomed over the land. 2 fellows were driving the car. They said they were pimps. 2 other fellows were passengers with me. We sat tight and bent our minds to the goal. We went over Berthoud Pass, down the Great Plateau, Tabernash, Troublesome, Kremling, down Rabbit Ears past the Steamboat Springs and out. 50 miles of dusty detour, then Craig in the Great American Desert. As we crossed the Colorado-Utah border, I saw God in the sky in the form of huge gold sun-burning clouds above the desert that seemed to point a finger at me and say, "Pass here and go on. You're on the road to heaven." Ah, well, alack a day. I was more interested in some old rotted covered wagons and pool tables sitting in the Nevada desert near a Coca-Cola stand, and where there were huts with their weather-beaten signs still flapping in the haunted, shrouded desert wind saying, "Rattlesnake Bill lived here," or "Broken Mouth Annie holed up here for years." Yes, zoom. In Salt Lake City, the pimps checked on their girls and we drove on. Before I knew it, once again I was seeing the fabled city of San Francisco stretched on the bay in the middle of the night. I ran immediately to Dean. He had a little house now. I was burning to know what was on his mind and what would happen now, for there was nothing behind me anymore. All my bridges were gone and I didn't give a damn about anything at all. I knocked on his door at 2 o'clock in the morning. He came to the door stark naked, and it might have been the president knocking for all he cared. He received the world in the raw. "Sal," he said with genuine awe, "I didn't think you'd actually do it. You finally come to me." "Yep," I said. Everything fell apart in me. "How are things with you?" Not so good, but we've got a million things to talk about, Sal. The time has finally come for us to talk and get with it." We agreed it was about time and went in. My arrival was somewhat like the coming of the strange, most evil angel in the home of Snow White Fleece, as Dean and I began talking excitedly in the kitchen downstairs, which brought forth sobs from upstairs. Everything I said to Dean was answered with a wild, whispering, shuddering, "Yes!" Camille knew what was going to happen. Apparently Dean had been quiet for a few months. Now the angel had arrived and he was going mad again. "What's the matter with her?" I whispered. He said, "She's getting worse and worse, man. She cries and makes tantrums and won't let me out to see Slim Gaylord. Gets mad every time I'm late. Then when I stay home, she won't talk to me and says I'm an utter beast." He ran upstairs to soothe her. I heard Camille yell, "You're a liar, you're a liar, you're a liar." I took the opportunity to examine the very wonderful house they had. It was a 2-story, crooked, rickety wooden cottage in the middle of tenements, right on top of Russian Hill, with a view of the bay. It had 4 rooms, 3 upstairs and one immense sort of basement kitchen downstairs. The kitchen door opened onto a grassy court where wash lines were. In back of the kitchen was a storage room where Dean's old shoes still were caked an inch thick with Texas mud from the night the Hudson got stuck in the Brazos River. Of course, the Hudson was gone. Dean hadn't been able to make further payments on it. He had no car at all now. Their second baby was accidentally coming. It was horrible to hear Camille sobbing so. We couldn't stand it and went out to buy beer and brought it back to the kitchen. Camille finally went to sleep or spent the night staring blankly at the dark. I had no idea what was really wrong, except perhaps Dean had driven her mad after all. After my last leaving of Frisco, he had gone crazy over Mary Lou again and spent months haunting her apartment on Divisadero, where every night she had a different sailor in, and he peeked down through her mail slot and could see her bed. There he saw Mary Lou sprawled in the morning with a boy. He trailed her around town. He wanted absolute proof that she was a whore. He loved her. He sweated over her. Finally, he got hold of some bad green, as it's called in the trade, green, uncured marijuana, quite by mistake, and smoked too much of it. "The first day," he said, "I lay rigid as a board in bed and couldn't move or say a word. I just looked straight up with my eyes open wide. I could hear buzzing in my head and saw all kinds of wonderful technicolor visions and felt wonderful. The second day, everything came to me. Everything I'd ever done or known or read or heard or conjectured came back to me and rearranged itself in my mind in a brand new logical way, and because I could think of nothing else in the interior concerns of holding and catering to the amazement and gratitude I felt, I kept saying yes, 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 yes. Not loud, just yes, real quiet, and these green tea visions lasted until the 3rd day. I had understood everything by then. My whole life was decided. I knew I loved Mary Lou. I knew I had to find my father, wherever he is, and save him. I knew you were my buddy, etc. I knew how great Carlo is. I knew 1,000 things about everybody everywhere. Then the 3rd day I began having a terrible series of waking nightmares, and they were so absolutely horrible and grisly and green that I just lay there doubled up with my hands around my knees saying, oh. The neighbors heard me and sent for a doctor. Camille was away with the baby visiting her folks. The whole neighborhood was concerned. They came in and found me lying on the bed with my arms stretched out forever. Sal, I ran to Mary Lou with some of that tea. And do you know what? The same thing happened to that dumb little box. The same visions, the same logic, the same final decision about everything. The view of all truths in one painful lump leading to nightmares and pain. And then I knew I loved her so much I wanted to kill her. I ran home and beat my head on the wall. I ran to Ed Dunkel. He's back in Frisco with Galatea. I asked him about a guy we know has a gun. I went to the guy. I got the gun. I ran to Mary Lou. I looked down the mail slot. She was sleeping with a guy. Had to retreat and hesitate. Came back in an hour. I barged in. She was alone. I gave her the gun. I told her to kill me. She held the gun in her hand the longest time. I asked her for a sweet dead pact. She didn't want. I said one of us had to die. She said no. I beat my head on the wall, man. I was out of my mind. She'll tell you she talked me out of it. Then what happened? That was months ago after you left. She finally married a used car dealer. Dumb bastard has promised to kill if he finds me. If necessary, I shall have to defend myself and kill him, and I'll go to San Quentin. 'Cause Sal, one more rap of any kind, and I go to San Quentin for life. That's the end of me. Bad hand and all. He showed me his hand. I hadn't noticed in the excitement that he had suffered a terrible accident to his hand. I hit Mary Lou on the brow on February 26th at 6 o'clock in the evening. In fact, 6:10, because I remember I had to make my hotshot freight in an hour and 20 minutes. The last time we met and the last time we decided everything, and now listen to this. My thumb only deflected off her brow. She didn't even have a bruise, and in fact laughed. But my thumb broke above the wrist, and a horrible doctor came and made a setting of the bones. That was difficult and took 3 separate castings, 23 combined hours of sitting on hard benches, waiting, etc., and the final cast had a traction pin stuck through the tip of my thumb, so in April when they took off the cast, the pin infected my bone and I developed osteomyelitis, which has become chronic. And after an operation which failed and a month in a cast, the result was the amputation of a wee bare piece off the tip ass end. He unwrapped the bandages and showed me. I had to support Camille and Amy and had to work as fast as I could at Firestone as mold man, curing recap tires and later hauling big 150-pound tires from the floor to the top of the cars. Could only use my good hand and kept banging the bad. Broke it again, had it reset again. It's getting all infected and swelled again. So now I take care of baby while Camille works. You see? Heebie-jeebies, I'm classification 3A. Jazzhound Moriarty has a sore butt. His wife gives him daily injections of penicillin for his thumb, which produces hives, for he's allergic. He must take 60,000 units of Fleming's juice within a month. He must take 1 tablet every 4 hours for this month to combat allergy produced from this juice. He must take codeine aspirin to relieve the pain in his thumb. He must have surgery on his leg for inflamed cyst. He must rise next Monday at 6 a.m. to get his teeth cleaned. He must see foot doctor twice a week for treatment. He must take cough syrup each night. He must blow and snort constantly to clear his nose, which has collapsed just under the bridge, or an operation some years ago weakened it. He lost his thumb on his throwing arm, greatest 70-yard passer in the history of New Mexico State Reformatory, and yet I've never felt better and finer and happier with the world and to see little lovely children playing in the sun. And I am so glad to see you, my fine, gone, wonderful Sal, and I know everything will be all right. You'll see her tomorrow. My terrific, darling, beautiful daughter can now stand alone for 30 seconds at a time. She weighs 22 pounds, is 29 inches long. I've just figured out she is 31.25% English, 27.5% Irish, 25% German, 8.75% Dutch, and 7.5% Scotch. 100% wonderful. He fondly congratulated me for the book I had finished, which was now accepted by the publishers. We know life, Sal. We're growing older, each of us, little by little, and are coming to know things. What you tell me about your life, I understand well. I've always dug your feelings, and now, in fact, you're ready to hook up with a real great girl if you can only find her, and cultivate her and make her mind your soul, as I have tried so hard with these damn women of mine. Shit! 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 He yelled. And in the morning, Camille threw both of us out, baggage and all. It began when we called Roy Johnson, old Denver Roy, and had him come over for beer, while Dean minded the baby and did the dishes and wash in the backyard, but did a sloppy job of it in his excitement. Johnson agreed to drive us to Mill City to look for Remy Boncourt. Camille came in from work at the doctor's office and gave us all the sad look of a harassed woman's life. I tried to show this haunted woman that I had no mean intentions concerning her home life by saying hello to her and talking as warmly as I could. But she knew it was a con and maybe one I learned from Dean and only gave a brief smile. In the morning there was a terrible scene. She lay on the bed sobbing, and in the midst of this I suddenly had the need to go to the bathroom, and the only way I could get there was through her room. Dean, I cried. Where's the nearest bar? Bar? He said, surprised. He was washing his hands in the kitchen sink downstairs. He thought I wanted to get drunk. I told him my dilemma, and he said, Go right ahead, she does that all the time. No, I couldn't do that. I rushed out to look for a bar. I walked uphill and downhill in the vicinity of 4 blocks on Russian Hill and found nothing but laundromats, cleaners, soda fountains, beauty parlors. I came back to the crooked little house. They were yelling at each other as I slipped through with a feeble smile and locked myself in the bathroom. A few moments later, Camille was throwing Dean's things on the living room floor and telling him to pack. To my amazement, I saw a full-length oil painting of Galatea Dunkel over the sofa. I suddenly realized that all these women were spending months of loneliness and womanliness together, chatting about the madness of the men. I heard Dean's maniacal giggle across the house, together with the wails of his baby. The next thing I knew, he was gliding around the house like Groucho Marx, with his broken thumb wrapped in a huge white bandage sticking up like a beacon that stands motionless above the frenzy of the waves. Once again, I saw his pitiful, huge, battered trunk with socks and dirty underwear sticking out. He bent over it, throwing in everything he could find. Then he got his suitcase, the beatest suitcase in the USA. It was made of paper with designs on it to make it look like leather, and hinges of some kind pasted on. A great rip ran down the top. Dean lashed on a rope. Then he grabbed a sea bag and threw things into that. I got my bag, stuffed it, and as Camille lay in bed saying, "Liar, liar, liar," we leaped out of the house and struggled down the street to the nearest cable car. A mass of men in suitcases with that enormous bandaged thumb sticking up in the air. That thumb became the symbol of Dean's final development. He no longer cared about anything, as before, but now he also cared about everything in principle. That is to say, it was all the same to him, and he belonged to the world, and there was nothing he could do about it. He stopped me in the middle of the street. "Now, man, I know you're probably real bugged. You just got to town, and we get thrown out the first day, and you're wondering, what have I done to deserve this, and so on, together with all the horrible appurtenances. But look at me, please, Sal, look at me." I looked at him. He was wearing a T-shirt, torn pants hanging down his belly, tattered shoes. He had not shaved. His hair was wild and busy, his eyes bloodshot, and that tremendous bandaged thumb stood, supported in midair, at heart level. He had to hold it up that way. And on his face was the goofiest grin I ever saw. He stumbled around in a circle and looked everywhere. "What do my eyeballs see? Ah, the blue sky, Longfellow." He swayed and blinked. He rubbed his eyes. "Together with windows. Have you ever dug windows? Now let's talk about windows. I've seen some really crazy windows that have made faces at me, and some of them had shades drawn, and so they winked." Out of his sea bag, he fished a copy of Eugène Sue's Mysteries of Paris, and adjusting the front of his T-shirt, began reading on the street corner with a pedantic air. "Now really, Sal, let's dig everything as we go along." He forgot about that in an instant and looked around blankly. I was glad I had come. He needed me now. "Why did Camille throw you out? What are you going to do?" He said. We racked our brains for where to go and what to do. I realized it was up to me. Poor, poor Dean. The devil himself had never fallen farther. An idiocy, with infected thumb, surrounded by battered suitcases of his motherless, feverish life across America and back numberless times. An undone bird. "Let's walk to New York," he said. "And as we do so, let's take stock of everything along the way. Yes." I took out my money and counted it. I showed it to him. "I have here," I said, "the sum of $83 and change. If you come with me, let's go to New York, and after that, let's go to Italy." "Italy," he said. His eyes lit up. "Italy, yes. How shall we get there, dear Sal?" I pondered this. "I'll make some money. I'll get $1,000 from the publisher. We'll go dig all the crazy women in Rome, Paris, all those places. We'll sit at sidewalk cafes. We'll live in whorehouses. Why not go to Italy?" "Why, yes," said Dean, and then realized I was serious and looked at me out of the corner of his eye for the first time. For I'd never committed myself before with regard to this burdensome existence, and that look was the look of a man weighing his chances at the last moment before the bet. There were triumph and insolence in his eyes, a devilish look, and he never took his eyes off mine for a long time. I looked back at him and blushed. I said, "What's the matter?" I felt wretched when I asked it. He made no answer, but continued looking at me with the same wary, insolent side-eye. I tried to remember everything he'd done in his life, and if there wasn't something back there to make him suspicious of something now. Resolutely and firmly I repeated what I said. "Come to New York with me. I've got the money." I looked at him. My eyes were watering with embarrassment and tears. Still he stared at me. Now his eyes were blanking, looking through me. It was probably the pivotal point of our friendship when he realized I had actually spent some hours thinking about him and his troubles, and he was trying to place that in his tremendously involved and tormented mental categories. Something clicked in both of us. In me it was suddenly concern for a man who was years younger than I, 5 years, and whose fate was wound with mine across the passage of the recent years. In him it was a matter that I can ascertain only from what he did afterward. He became extremely joyful and said everything was settled. "What was that look?" I asked. He was pained to hear me say that. He frowned. It was rarely that Dean frowned. We both felt perplexed and uncertain of something. We were standing on top of a hill on a beautiful sunny day in San Francisco. Our shadows fell across the sidewalk. Out of the tenement next to Camille's house filed 11 Greek men and women, who instantly lined themselves up on the sunny pavement, while another backed up across the narrow street and smiled at them over a camera. We gaped at these ancient people who were having a wedding party for one of their daughters. Probably the 1,000th in an unbroken dark generation of smiling in the sun. They were well-dressed and they were strange. Dean and I might have been in Cyprus for all of that. Gulls flew overhead in the sparkling air. "Well," said Dean in a very shy and sweet voice, "shall we go?" "Yes," I said, "let's go to Italy." And so we picked up our bags, he the trunk with his one good arm and I the rest, and staggered to the cable car stop. In a moment rolled down the hill with our legs dangling to the sidewalk from the jiggling shelf. Two broken-down heroes of the Western night. First thing, we went to a bar down on Market Street and decided everything. That we would stick together and be buddies till we died. Dean was very quiet and preoccupied, looking at the old bums in the saloon that reminded him of his father. "I think he's in Denver. This time we must absolutely find him. He may be in county jail, he may be around Larimer Street again, but he's to be found. Agreed?" Yes, it was agreed. We were going to do everything we'd never done and been too silly to do in the past. Then we promised ourselves 2 days of kicks in San Francisco before starting off. And of course the agreement was to go by travel bureau and share the gas cars and save as much money as possible. Dean claimed he no longer needed Mary Lou, though he still loved her. We both agreed he would make out in New York. Dean put on his pinstripe suit with a sports shirt. We stashed our gear in a Greyhound bus locker for 10 cents. And we took off to meet Roy Johnson, who was going to be our chauffeur for 2 days' Frisco kicks. Roy agreed over the phone to do so. He arrived at the corner of Market and 3rd shortly thereafter and picked us up. Roy was now living in Frisco, working as a clerk and married to a pretty little blonde called Dorothy. Dean confided that her nose was too long. This was his point of contention about her for some strange reason, but her nose wasn't too long at all. Roy Johnson is a thin, dark, handsome kid with a pin-sharp face and combed hair that he keeps shoving back from the sides of his head. He had an extremely earnest approach and a big smile. Evidently his wife, Dorothy, had wrangled with him over the chauffeuring idea, and determined to make a stand as the man of the house — they lived in a little room — he nevertheless stuck by his promise to us, but with consequences. His mental dilemma resolved itself in a bitter silence. He drove Dean and me all over Frisco at all hours of day and night and never said a word. All he did was go through red lights and make sharp turns on 2 wheels, and this was telling us the shifts to which we'd put him. He was midway between the challenge of his new wife and the challenge of his old Denver pool hall gang leader. Dean was pleased and, of course, unperturbed by the driving. We paid absolutely no attention to Roy and sat in the back and yacked. The next thing was to go to Mill City to see if we could find Remy Boncourt. I noticed with some wonder that the old ship Admiral Freebie was no longer in the bay, and then, of course, Remy was no longer in the second-to-last compartment of the shack in the canyon. A beautiful colored girl opened the door instead. Dean and I talked to her a great deal. Roy Johnson waited in the car reading Eugene Sue's Mysteries of Paris. I took one last look at Mill City and knew there was no sense trying to dig up the involved past. Instead, we decided to go see Galatea Dunkel about sleeping accommodations. Ed had left her again, was in Denver, and damned if she still didn't plot to get him back. We found her sitting cross-legged on the Oriental-type rug of her 4-room tenement flat on Upper Mission with a deck of fortune cards. Good girl. I saw sad signs that Ed Dunkel had lived here a while and then left out of stupors and disinclinations only. "He'll come back," said Galatea. "That guy can't take care of himself without me." She gave a furious look at Dean and Roy Johnson. It was Tommy Snark who did it this time. All the time before he came, Ed was perfectly happy and worked, and we went out and had wonderful times. Dean, you know that. Then they'd sit in the bathroom for hours, Ed in the bathtub and Snarky on the seat, and talk and talk and talk. Such silly things. Dean laughed. For years he had been chief prophet of that gang, and now they were learning his technique. Tommy Snark had grown a beard, and his big, sorrowful blue eyes had come looking for Ed Dunkel in Frisco. What happened, actually, and no lie, Tommy had his small finger amputated in a Denver mishap and collected a good sum of money. For no reason under the sun, they decided to give Galatea the slip and go to Portland, Maine, where apparently Snark had an aunt. So they were now either in Denver, going through, or already in Portland. "When Tom's money runs out, Ed'll be back," said Galatea, looking at her cards. Damn fool. He doesn't know anything and never did. All he has to do is know that I love him." Galatea looked like the daughter of the Greeks with the sunny camera, as she sat there on the rug, her long hair streaming to the floor, plying the fortune-telling cards. I got to like her. We even decided to go out that night and hear jazz. And Dean would take a 6-foot blonde who lived down the street, Marie. That night, Galatea, Dean, and I went to get Marie. This girl had a basement apartment, a little daughter, and an old car that barely ran, which Dean and I had to push down the street as the girls jammed the starter. We went to Galatea's, and there everybody sat around. Marie, her daughter, Galatea, Roy Johnson, Dorothy, his wife, all sullen in the overstuffed furniture as I stood in the corner, neutral in Frisco problems. And Dean stood in the middle of the room with his balloon thumb in the air, breast-high, giggling. "God damn," he said. "We're all losing our fingers. Ha, ha, ha." "Dean, why do you act so foolish?" said Galatea. "Camille called and said you left her. Don't you realize you have a daughter?" "He didn't leave her. She kicked him out," I said, breaking my neutrality. They all gave me dirty looks. Dean grinned. "And with that thumb, what do you expect the poor guy to do?" I added. They all looked at me. Particularly, Dorothy Johnson lowered a mean gaze on me. It wasn't anything but a sewing circle, and the center of it was the culprit, Dean, responsible, perhaps, for everything that was wrong. I looked out the window at the buzzing night street of Mission. I wanted to get going and hear the great jazz of Frisco. And remember, this was only my second night in town. "I think Mary Lou was very, very wise leaving you, Dean," said Galatea. "For years now, you haven't had any sense of responsibility for anyone. You've done so many awful things, I don't know what to say to you." And in fact, that was the point. They all sat around looking at Dean with lowered and hating eyes, and he stood on the carpet in the middle of them and giggled. He just giggled. He made a little dance. His bandage was getting dirtier all the time. It began to flop and unroll. I suddenly realized that Dean, by virtue of his enormous series of sins, was becoming the idiot, the imbecile, the saint of the lot. "You have absolutely no regard for anybody but yourself and your damn kicks. All you think about is what's hanging between your legs and how much money or fun you can get out of people, and then you just throw them aside. Not only that, but you're silly about it. It never occurs to you that life is serious and that there are people trying to make something decent out of it, instead of just goofing all the time." That's what Dean was. The holy goof. "Camille is crying her heart out tonight, but don't think for a minute she wants you back. She said she never wanted to see you again, and she said it was to be final this time. Yet you stand here and make silly faces, and I don't think there's a care in your heart." This was not true. I knew better, and I could have told them all. I didn't see any sense in trying it. I longed to go and put my arm around Dean and say, "Now look here, all of you. Remember just one thing. This guy has his troubles too. And another thing, he never complains, and he's given all of you a damn good time just being himself. And if that isn't enough for you, then send him to the firing squad. That's apparently what you're itching to do anyway." Nevertheless, Galatea Dunkel was the only one in the gang who wasn't afraid of Dean and could sit there calmly with her face hanging out, telling him off in front of everybody. There were earlier days in Denver when Dean had everybody sit in the dark with the girls and just talked and talked and talked, with a voice that was once hypnotic and strange, and was said to make the girls come across by sheer force of persuasion and the content of what he said. This was when he was 15, 16. Now his disciples were married, and the wives of his disciples had him on the carpet for the sexuality and the life he had helped bring into being. I listened further. "Now you're going east with Sal," Galatea said. "And what do you think you're going to accomplish by that? Camille has to stay home and mind the baby now you're gone. How can she keep her job? She never wants to see you again, and I don't blame her. If you see Ed along the road, you tell him to come back to me or I'll kill him." Just as flat as that. It was the saddest night. I felt as if I was with strange brothers and sisters in a pitiful dream. Then a complete silence fell over everybody. Where once Dean would have talked his way out, he now fell silent himself, but standing in front of everybody, ragged and broken and idiotic, right under the light bulbs, his bony, mad face covered with sweat and throbbing veins, saying yes, 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 as though tremendous revelations were pouring into him all the time now. And I am convinced they were, and the others suspected as much and were frightened. He was beat, the root, the soul of beatific. What was he knowing? He tried all in his power to tell me what he was knowing, and they envied that about me, my position at his side, defending him and drinking him in as they once tried to do. Then they looked at me. What was I, a stranger, doing on the West Coast this fair night? I recoiled from the thought. "We're going to Italy," I said. I washed my hands of the whole matter. Then, too, there was a strange sense of maternal satisfaction in the air, for the girls were really looking at Dean the way a mother looks at the dearest and most errant child, and he, with his sad thumb and all his revelations, knew it well. And that was why he was able, in tick-tocking silence, to walk out of the apartment without a word, to wait for us downstairs as soon as we made up our minds about time. This was what we sensed about the ghost on the sidewalk. I looked out the window. He was alone in the doorway, digging the street. Bitterness, recriminations, advice, morality, sadness. Everything was behind him, and ahead of him was the ragged and ecstatic joy of pure being. "Come on, Galatea, Marie, let's go hit the jazz joints and forget it. Dean will be dead someday. Then what can you say to him?" "The sooner he's dead, the better," said Galatea, and she spoke officially for almost everyone in the room. "Very well, then," I said. "But now he's alive, and I'll bet you want to know what he does next, and that's because he's got the secret that we're all busting to find out, and it's splitting his head wide open. And if he goes mad, don't worry, it won't be your fault, but the fault of God." They objected to this. They said I really didn't know Dean. They said he was the worst scoundrel that ever lived, and I'd find out someday to my regret. I was amused to hear them protest so much. Roy Johnson rose to the defense of the ladies and said he knew Dean better than anybody. And all Dean was just a very interesting and even amusing con man. I went out to find Dean and we had a brief talk about it. "Ah, man, don't worry. Everything is perfect and fine." He was rubbing his belly and licking his lips. The girls came down and we started out on our big night, once more pushing the car down the street. "Wee-hoo, let's go," cried Dean. And we jumped in the back seat and clanked to the little Harlem on Folsom Street. Out we jumped in the warm, mad night, hearing a wild tenor man bawling horn across the way, going, "Ee-yaw, ee-yaw, ee-yaw," and hands clapping to the beat and folks yelling, "Go, go, go." Dean was already racing across the street with his thumb in the air, yelling, "Blow, man, blow," and a bunch of colored men in Saturday night suits were whooping it up in front. It was a sawdust saloon with a small bandstand on which the fellows huddled with their hats on, blowing over people's heads, a crazy place. Crazy, floppy women wandered around, sometimes in their bathrobes. Bottles clanked in the alleys. In the back of the joint, in a dark corridor beyond the splattered toilets, scores of men and women stood against the wall, drinking wine spodioti and spitting at the stars. Wine and whiskey. The battered tenor man was blowing at the peak of a wonderfully satisfactory free idea. A rising and falling riff that went from ee-yaw to a crazier ee-dee-lee-yah, and blasted along to the rolling crash of butt-scarred drums hammered by a big, brutal Negro with a bull neck who didn't give a damn about anything but punishing his busted tubs. Crash, rattle-tee-boom, crash. Uproars of music, and the tenorman had it. Everybody knew he had it. Dean was clutching his head in the crowd, and it was a mad crowd. They were all urging the tenorman to hold it and keep it, with cries and wild eyes, and he was raising himself from a crouch and going down again with his horn, looping it up in a clear cry above the furor. A 6-foot skinny Negro woman was rolling her bones at the man's horn bell, and he just jabbed it at her. E. Everybody was rocking and roaring. Galatea and Marie, with beer in their hands, were standing on their chairs, shaking and jumping. Groups of colored guys stumbled in from the street, falling over one another to get there. "Stay with it, man," roared a man with a foghorn voice and let out a big groan that must have been heard clear out in Sacramento. "Ah, ha, hoo." "Whew," said Dean. He was rubbing his chest, his belly. The sweat splashed from his face. Boom, kick. That drummer was kicking his drums down the cellar, and the rolling beat upstairs with his murderous sticks. Rattle-tee-boom. A big fat man was jumping on the platform, making it sag and creak. "You." The pianist was only pounding the keys with spread-eagle fingers, chords at intervals when the great tenor man was drawing breath for another blast. Chinese chord, shuddering the piano in every timbre, chink and wire, boing. The tenor man jumped down from the platform and stood in the crowd, blowing around. His hat was over his eyes. Somebody pushed it back for him. He just hauled back and stamped his foot and blew down a hoarse, bawling blast and drew breath, and raised the horn and blew high, wide, and screaming in the air. Dean was directly in front of him with his face lowered to the bell of the horn, clapping his hands, pouring sweat on the man's keys, and the man noticed and laughed in his horn, a long, quivering, crazy laugh, and everybody else laughed, and they rocked and rocked. And finally, the tenor man decided to blow his top and crouched down and held a note in high C for a long time as everything else crashed along and the cries increased, and I thought the cops would come swarming from the nearest precinct. Dean was in a trance. The tenorman's eyes were fixed straight on him. He had a madman who not only understood but cared and wanted to understand more, and much more than there was. And they began dueling for this. Everything came out of the horn. No more phrases, just cries, cries, bah, and down, beep, and up to E, and down to clinkers and over to sideways, echoing horn sounds. He tried everything up, down, sideways, upside down, horizontal, 30 degrees, 40 degrees, and finally he fell back in somebody's arms and gave up, and everybody pushed around and yelled, "Yes, yes, he blowed that one." Dean wiped himself with his handkerchief. Then up stepped the tenor man on the bandstand and asked for a slow beat, and looked sadly out the open door over people's heads and began singing, "Close Your Eyes." Things quieted down a minute. The tenorman wore a tattered suede jacket, a purple shirt, cracked shoes, and suit pants without press. He didn't care. He looked like a Negro hassle. His big brown eyes were concerned with sadness and the singing of songs slowly, with long, thoughtful pauses. But in the second chorus he got excited and grabbed the mic and jumped down from the bandstand and bent to it. To sing a note, he had to touch his shoe tops and pull it all up to blow, and he blew so much he staggered from the effect and only recovered himself in time for the next long, slow note. "Music, play." He leaned back with his face to the ceiling, mic held below. He shook, he swayed, then he leaned in, almost falling with his face against the mic. "Make it dreamy for dancing." And he looked at the street outside with his lips curled in scorn. Billie Holiday's hip sneer. "While we go romancing." He staggered sideways. "Love's holiday." He shook his head with disgust and weariness at the whole world. "We'll make it seem." What would it make it seem? Everybody waited. He mourned. "Okay." The piano hit a chord. "So baby, come on, just close your pretty little eyes." His mouth quivered. He looked at us, Dean and me, with an expression that seemed to say, "Hey now, what's this thing we're all doing in this sad brown world?" And then he came to the end of his song. And for this there had to be elaborate preparations, during which time he could send all the messages to Garcia around the world 12 times, and what difference did it make to anybody? Because here we were dealing with the pit and prune juice of poor beat life itself in the god-awful streets of man. So he said it and sang it. "Close your," and blew it way up to the ceiling, through to the stars, and on out. "Eyes," and staggered off the platform to brood. He sat in the corner with a bunch of boys and paid no attention to them. He looked down and wept. He was the greatest. Dean and I went over to talk to him. We invited him out to the car. In the car he suddenly yelled, "Yes, ain't nothing I like better than good kicks. Where do we go?" Dean jumped up and down in the seat, giggling maniacally. "Later, later," said the tenor man. "I'll get my boy to drive us down to Jamson's Nook. I got to sing, man. I live to sing. Been singing Close Your Eyes for 2 weeks. I don't want to sing nothing else." "What are the boys up to?" "We told them we were going to New York in 2 days. Lord, I ain't never been there, and they tell me it's a real jumpin' town, but I ain't got no cause complaining where I am. I'm married, you know." "Oh, yes?" said Dean, lighting up. "And where is the darling tonight?" "What do you mean?" said the tenor man, looking at him out of the corner of his eye. "I told you I was married to her, didn't I?" Oh, yes, said Dean. "I was just asking. Maybe she has friends or sisters. A ball, you know. I'm just looking for a ball." "Yeah, what's good's a ball? Life's too sad to be balling all the time," said the tenorman, lowering his eye to the street. "Shit," he said. "I ain't got no money and I don't care tonight." We went back in for more. The girls were so disgusted with Dean and me for gunning off and jumping around that they had left and gone to Jamson's Nook on foot. The car wouldn't run anyway. We saw a horrible sight in the bar. A white hipster fairy had come in wearing a Hawaiian shirt and was asking the big drummer if he could sit in. The musicians looked at him suspiciously. "Did you blow?" He said he did, mincing. They looked at one another and said, Yeah, that's what the man does, shit." So the fairy sat down at the tubs and they started the beat of a jump number, and he began stroking the snares with soft, goofy bop brushes, swaying his neck with that complacent, Reichian-analyzed ecstasy that doesn't mean anything except too much tea and soft foods and goofy kicks on the cool order. But he didn't care. He smiled joyously into space and kept the beat, though softly, with bop subtleties. A giggling, rippling background for big, solid foghorn blues the boys were blowing, unaware of him. The big Negro bullneck drummer sat waiting for his turn. "What that man doing?" he said. "Play the music," he said. "What in hell?" he said. "Shit," and looked away disgusted. The tenor-man's boy showed up. He was a little taut Negro with a great big Cadillac. We all jumped in. He hunched over the wheel and blew the car clear across Frisco without stopping once, 70 miles an hour, right through traffic, and nobody even noticed him. He was so good. Dean was in ecstasies. "Dig this guy, man. Dig the way he sits there and don't move a bone and just balls that jack and can talk all night while he's doing it. Only thing is he doesn't bother with talking. Ah, man, the things I could, I wish, yes. Let's go. Let's not stop. Go now, yes." And the boy wound around a corner and bowled us right in front of Jamson's Nook and was parked. A cab pulled up. Out of it jumped a skinny, withered little Negro preacher man who threw $1 at the cabbie and yelled, "Blow," and ran into the club and dashed right through the downstairs bar yelling, "Blow, blow, blow," and stumbled upstairs, almost falling on his face, and blew the door open and fell into the jazz session room with his hands out to support him against anything he might fall on. And he fell right on Lampshade, who was working as a waiter in Jamson's Nook that season, and the music was there blasting and blasting, and he stood transfixed in the open door, screaming, "Blow for me, man, blow!" And the man was a little short Negro with an alto horn that Dean said obviously lived with his grandmother, just like Tom Snark, slept all day and blew all night, and blew 100 choruses before he was ready to jump for fair. And that's what he was doing. "It's Carlo Marx," screamed Dean above the fury. And it was. This little grandmother's boy with the taped-up alto had beady, glittering eyes, small, crooked feet, spindly legs, and he hopped and flopped with his horn and threw his feet around and kept his eyes fixed on the audience, which was just people laughing at a dozen tables, the room 30 by 30 feet and low ceiling. And he never stopped. He was very simple in his ideas. What he liked was the surprise of a new simple variation of a chorus. He'd go from tatoop tatarara, repeating and hopping to it and kissing and smiling into his horn to tatoop e da dee dadarup, tatoop e da dee dadarup, and it was all great moments of laughter and understanding for him and everyone else who heard. His tone was clear as a bell, high, pure, and blew straight in our faces from 2 feet away. Dean stood in front of him, oblivious to everything else in the world, with his head bowed, his hands socking in together, his whole body jumping on his heels, and the sweat, always the sweat, pouring and splashing down his tormented collar to lie actually in a pool at his feet. Galatea and Marie were there, and it took us 5 minutes to realize it. Ooh, Frisco nights, the end of the continent and the end of doubt, all dull doubt and tomfoolery goodbye. Lampshade was roaring around with his trays of beer. Everything he did was in rhythm. He yelled at the waitress with the beat. "Hey now, baby, make away, make away. It's Lampshade coming your way." And he hurled by her with the beers in the air and roared through the swinging doors into the kitchen and danced with the cooks and came sweating back. The horn man sat absolutely motionless at a corner table with an untouched drink in front of him, staring gook-eyed into space, his hands hanging at his sides till they almost touched the floor, his feet outspread like lolling tongues, his body shriveled into absolute weariness and entranced sorrow and what all was on his mind. A man who knocked himself out every evening and let the others put the quietus to him in the night. Everything swirled around him like a cloud. And that little grandmother's alto, that little Carlo Marx, hopped and monkey-danced with his magic horn and blew 200 choruses of blues, each one more frantic than the other, and no signs of failing energy or willingness to call anything a day. The whole room shivered. On the corner of 4th and Folsom an hour later, I stood with Ed Fournier, a San Francisco alto man who waited with me while Dean made a phone call in a saloon to have Roy Johnson pick us up. It wasn't anything much. We were just talking, except that suddenly we saw a very strange and insane sight. It was Dean. He wanted to give Roy Johnson the address of the bar, so he told him to hold the phone a minute and ran out to see. And to do this, he had to rush pell-mell through a long bar of brawling drinkers in white shirt sleeves, go to the middle of the street, and look at the post signs. He did this crouched low to the ground like Groucho Marx, his feet carrying him with amazing swiftness out of the bar, like an apparition with his balloon thumb stuck up in the night, and came to a whirling stop in the middle of the road, looking everywhere above him for the signs. They were hard to see in the dark, and he spun a dozen times in the road, thumb upheld in a wild, anxious silence. A wild-haired person with a ballooning thumb held up like a great goose of the sky, spinning and spinning in the dark, the other hand distractedly inside his pants. Ed Fournier was saying, "I blow a sweet tone wherever I go, and if people don't like it, it ain't nothing I can do about it. Say, man, that buddy of yours is a crazy cat. Look at him over there." And we looked. There was a big silence everywhere as Dean saw the signs and rushed back in the bar, practically going under someone's legs as they came out and gliding so fast through the bar that everybody had to do a double take to see him. A moment later, Roy Johnson showed up, and with the same amazing swiftness, Dean glided across the street and into the car without a sound. We were off again. "Now, Roy, I know you're all hung up with your wife about this thing, but we absolutely must make 46th and Geary in the incredible time of 3 minutes or everything is lost. Ahem. Yes, cough, cough. In the morning, Sal and I are leaving for New York, and this is absolutely our last night of kicks, and I know you won't mind." No, Roy Johnson didn't mind. He only drove through every red light he could find and hurried us along in our foolishness. At dawn, he went home to bed. Dean and I ended up with a colored guy called Walter, who ordered drinks at the bar and had them lined up and said, "Wine Spodioti," which was a shot of port wine, a shot of whiskey, and a shot of port wine. "Nice sweet jacket for all that bad whiskey," he yelled. He invited us to his home for a bottle of beer. He lived in the tenements in back of Howard. His wife was asleep when we came in. The only light in the apartment was the bulb over her bed. We had to get up on a chair and unscrew the bulb as she lay smiling there. Dean did it, fluttering his lashes. She was about 15 years older than Walter, and the sweetest woman in the world. Then we had to plug in the extension over her bed, and she smiled and smiled. She never asked Walter where he'd been, what time it was, nothing. Finally, we were set in the kitchen with the extension and sat down around the humble table to drink the beer and tell the stories. Dawn. It was time to leave and move the extension back to the bedroom and screw back the bulb. Walter's wife smiled and smiled as we repeated the insane thing all over again. She never said a word. Out on the dawn street, Dean said, "Now you see, man, there's a real woman for you. Never a harsh word, never a complaint or modified. Her old man can come in any hour of the night with anybody and have talks in the kitchen and drink the beer and leave any old time. This is a man, and that's his castle." He pointed up at the tenement. We stumbled off. The big night was over. A cruising car followed us suspiciously for a few blocks. We bought fresh donuts in a bakery on 3rd Street and ate them in the gray, ragged street. A tall, bespectacled, well-dressed fellow came stumbling down the street with a Negro in a truck-driving cap. They were a strange pair. A big truck rolled by, and the Negro pointed at it excitedly and tried to express his feeling. The tall white man furtively looked over his shoulder and counted his money. "It's all bully," giggled Dean, "counting his money and worrying about everything, and all that other boy wants to do is talk about trucks and things he knows." We followed them a while. Holy flowers floating in the air were all these tired faces in the dawn of jazz America. We had to sleep. Galatea Dunkles was out of the question. Dean knew a railroad brakeman called Ernest Burke, who lived with his father in a hotel room on 3rd Street. Originally, he'd been on good terms with him, but lately not so, and the idea was for me to try persuading them to let us sleep on their floor. It was horrible. I had a call from a morning diner. The old man answered the phone suspiciously. He remembered me from what his son had told him. To our surprise, he came down to the lobby and let us in. It was just a sad old brown Frisco hotel. We went upstairs and the old man was kind enough to give us the entire bed. "I have to get up anyway," he said, and retired to the little kitchenette to brew coffee. He began telling stories about his railroad days. He reminded me of my father. I stayed up and listened to the stories. Dean, not listening, was washing his teeth and bustling around saying, "Yes, that's right," to everything he said. Finally, we slept. And in the morning, Ernest came back from a Western Division run and took the bed as Dean and I got up. Now old Mr. Burke dolled himself up for a date with his middle-aged sweetheart. He put on a green tweed suit, a cloth cap, also green tweed, and stuck a flower in his lapel. These romantic old broken-down Frisco brakemen live sad but eager lives of their own, I told Dean in the toilet. It was very kind of him to let us sleep here. Yes, yes, said Dean, not listening. He rushed out to get a travel bureau car. My job was to hurry to Galatea Dunkel's for our bags. She was sitting on the floor with her fortune-telling cards. Well, goodbye, Galatea, and I hope everything works out fine. When Ed gets back, I'm going to take him to Jamson's Nook every night and let him get his fill of madness. Do you think that'll work, Sal? I don't know what to do. What do the cards say? The Ace of Spades is far away from him. The heart cards always surround him. The Queen of Hearts is never far. See this Jack of Spades? That's Dean. He's always around. Well, we're leaving for New York in an hour. Someday Dean's going to go on one of these trips and never come back. She let me take a shower and shave, and then I said goodbye and took the bags downstairs and hailed a Frisco taxi jitney, which was an ordinary taxi that ran a regular route, and you could hail it from any corner and ride to any corner you want for about 15 cents. Cramped in with other passengers like on a bus, but talking and telling jokes like in a private car. Mission Street that last day in Frisco was a great ride of construction work, children playing, whooping Negroes coming home from work, dust, excitement, the great buzzing and vibrating hum of what is really America's most excited city. And overhead the pure blue sky and the joy of the foggy sea that always rolls in at night to make everybody hungry for food and further excitement. I hated to leave. My stay had lasted 60-odd hours. With frantic Dean, I was rushing through the world without a chance to see it. In the afternoon, we were buzzing toward Sacramento and eastward again.